Hey, welcome back in today. We're going to dive into Helium, what's been happening with HNT, and there's a lot of confusion, I think, in the space of maybe this transition of where Helium is going. So we're going to try to break that down for you. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into TechPath. Let's talk about the network of networks, and that is HNT. You know the token. You probably have followed it. It is part of our CPI. I'll give you guys a sentiment breakdown before we wrap up the video, so make sure and stay to the end. Also, hit the like button right now. These are the kind of videos that hopefully are exactly what you want, and that is breaking down projects, giving you some insights to how we see things, and then applying a little bit of our own data to give you guys some answers and some directions. But anyway, hit the like button, make sure and subscribe to the channel. Let's get into Helium. Basically what they've done is they've dropped a new element of creating a larger network access for all of their miners, or I should say for the miners and the evolution of the new miners, which will be eventually all their miners. Their whole concept is pretty simple, and I want to kind of break down a little bit of kind of this whole direction. And there's some things flying across right here. We've been doing nothing but excited over the last few months, exploring HIP51, which is the process to jump into a new layer of networks, and we'll talk about what those layers are. And what this might mean for the rapidly growing community, what they kind of talk about here, of getting into more and more of this whole network of network theme. So you can kind of talk about what they're doing here, which is getting across on this, here's a good example. On average, Netflix used 6 GB of data to stream on HD film. If this was streamed over the Helium 5G network, it would be paid for with the data credits by the viewer and the hotspot owner, which is back to you guys earning the new token called mobile. Let me kind of zoom in on that. Called mobile, which is formerly HNT. You'll be able to exchange the two, still work interoperably. So the concept around this, and I want to kind of explain this because I think the way that I understand this, and I've been around tech a long time and I understand kind of the evolution. I also look at how technology starts to adopt into new layers, new areas. And there's ways to look at this. I'll give you some metaphors and some examples of maybe some ways to easily understand this. But essentially, what they've been doing over the past year or two is focused in on the IoT market. Now, that's Internet of Things. Internet of Things is, to a certain extent, a very, very small micron market. But at the same time, they were able to build out a massive distribution of both miners and people accessing the IoT, which is great, no problem. But at some point, there was going to be an end to that. So utility was going to have to really scale up to the next layer. And the next layer of, and they've been talking about this for quite some time, is entering into the 5G space. But if you look at what they talk about right here, for the IoT network, new networks tokens can be designed to optimize growth, different phases of each network. For the IoT network, hotspots would start earning a new token called IoT, while 5G hotspots would now earn a token called mobile. All of the tokens are still backed by HNT and can always be converted. Now remember, if you're an IoT hotspot miner today, you've been in the Helium network for quite some time, you've started to build that. The IoT network is not shrinking. It's going to be continuing to grow. The difference is that it now becomes part, the network of networks becomes part of a much greater environment in terms of being able to access the mobile token. And that, I think, is a big difference because it's going to drive the price of Helium up, which makes your IoT tokens worth more money. That's kind of my framework. Now, how does this all play into where Helium is going? And I wanted to bring up a tweet that they kind of talk about right here. Helium actually retweeted this. And it says, a lot of confusion floating around this weekend from YouTubers about Helium and the HIP challenges that are being voted on. This chart below has confused a lot of LoRaWAN miners, which I think is the IoT miners. And it is not a reward split chart. So this is kind of the variation, and that's the difference. I think a lot of people are getting confused, is that though you see this right here as 1.2%, remember that the size of the IoT market itself is so much smaller than cellular, VPN, and Wi-Fi. So there's going to be a massive explosion of new miners coming into the space, earning the mobile token or the mobile asset, and being able to convert that, which is only going to drive the value of HNT up overall. Now that's granted, there's a lot of ifs here, and this is one of those projects, Helium, that has been a utility project that so many people use as a framework of reference about how a blockchain can work for the better. And I think a lot of people have to understand that kind of the future of what these utilities are going to be, especially projects like Helium, is they still have to succeed at this. This isn't just a given that they're going to get the partnerships, get the deals. All of that still has to succeed. So they're starting in a new layer of technological development that is positive because there's very few projects that are doing what they're doing. But at the same time, it's also very challenging because now they have to go out and actually, ingest these networks. And we're talking about Wi-Fi networks. Think of it this way, IoT, let's say 10,000 potential network devices, and then that's not a fact statement, it's just giving you kind of a framework, versus adding Wi-Fi, VPN, and cellular going to 100 million device networks out there. So think of it much like, an overall expansion. The other aspect I think that is interesting here is that I think it's going to open up a whole new layer of miners. And what I mean by that is there's going to be the IoT miners that have the legacy equipment. So think of it as your iPhone 4. It barely even creeps along on these new networks. Granted, if your framework of mining is still within the IoT, you're still operating at regular speeds. If you were running on a 4G or a 3G iPhone and 3G networks were still being propagated throughout the land, you wouldn't notice speeds or battery drain or any of those kind of things. But now you're running on 5G, your machine isn't necessarily built for that 5G, so they need a new device to be able to be built for that 5G side of things. And I think that's the direction that they are trying to go with the utility case. That's back to their marketing network of networks. This makes perfect sense. I think this is something that they've talked about with us many times. We've had Helium on the show here and kind of the growth of it. And they've even hinted it a couple of times of what that was going to look like. Let me see, and I want to just show you what the Dow voting percentage was. So for HIP51 against HIP51. And you do see this right here. Now, what I don't know, and this is something that I would maybe ask you guys to do additional research, help us out from time to time. We always ask our audience to kind of dive into this. We'll reach out to Helium as well. Is this centralized into a lot of the early owners of HNT? Is this more of the framework if you kind of compare this to an example right now, because they are voting this out at 96.2% versus against HIP 51 at 3.76%. And if you kind of compare this to, let me kind of go to another chart real quick. This is a comparison of initial token allocations for a variety of blockchains. And Helium isn't on here, but I would love for Masari. So Ryan, if you're listening, love to see this one broken down, because this one, and this is still about a year old. This is back in August of last year. I'd love to see the update for this year. But even Ethereum on traditional, you can kind of see this public sale versus insiders, foundations, and more. And look at Terra. This was actually isolated last year in August as being overly allocated on insiders. Phantom is setting a little bit in a bit of concern. Even Avalanche, to a certain extent, 42%. Now, I don't know what the update on this is, so I'd love to see that. There are a lot of scenarios like this. So I don't know if Helium is one of those that is in that kind of situation that would essentially kind of affect this overall voting that they've got right here, because this is a pretty significant vote comparison at 96%. Something's up there. I don't know. This is something I'd love to dive in a little deeper. The point that I'm making here is, how is this going to affect Helium in terms of investment? The likelihood is that this is a very positive thing for Helium and the overall structure of what they're trying to do as a utility, because that's really what it boils down to. If you look at their network right here, just to kind of show you quickly, these are all IoT. Let's just zoom in. These are all IoT networks. So if you think about the density of what could potentially be there, that would look much like your cellular network, but adding in things like Wi-Fi networks, which is the gateways around cities, municipalities. This is something we've talked about this at length with Frank and the team at Helium and what we might see there. And I think this is going to be a big future for where Helium is going. Now, it doesn't mean that they're the only one out there. Knox, which is another token, is aiming to compete with Helium and Phantom in the near future. So the question is, will there be companies that can really kind of take what Helium is doing and really compete on a level that Helium is doing the kind of program? I kind of compare Helium in the space of networks similar to ETH. They're the first mover. They're the one that has the most density. They're the one that has all the IoT miners out there, pretty much when you think of it on a worldwide basis. And I think the likelihood is now they've got a network of miners. If the miners can get past the idea of that IoT is going to be a very small part of the overall network, it's going to be a one network of many, then I think the opportunity here is that these miners can also start amping up into the 5G network and start mining, new tokens, essentially, to go to that level of really kind of going into the growth aspect of where Helium could be going in the future. So lots of things happening, I think, around Helium, and I want to jump into a couple of other things here. Chapter 2, this was their blog post, the mission. Always been rapidly build open, affordable, and secure global wireless networks that are owned and operated by the people. If they're successful, this is going to be interesting, and this goes back to the whole point that I'm talking about, if they are successful, because this is a big strategy and a big, very bombastic move by Helium to take it on. Can they do it? Very good possibility they can, because they've been able to kind of use the IoT infrastructure and the whole process, and look how successful that was so far. So pretty neat stuff. There are now over 828,000 hotspots deployed with a remarkable 5,000 cities added every day with new applications using Helium daily by daily. So this gets back to the whole point I'm making, and that is that what we're going to witness, I think, is, think of it like this, and this is exactly the way Apple has done it. Everybody owned the iPhone 4, everybody owned the iPhone 5, everybody owned those revelations of different hardware elements, and now look at the market share that iPhone has. And any tech company will tell you that the evolution of hardware and access to new technology is the key to survival. And I think this is going to be the case with what Helium is doing. Let's talk about this right here, because this was kind of an interesting. Helium is showing others how to completely kill a project. Your hotspot after HIP will be next to nothing. Again, my argument to this would be the fact that it's going, and this is the argument, because I do think that there is a situation here brewing that Helium needs a good PR team to put this in place and help people, I should say, understand the growth opportunity of where this might be going. But I do understand their position, because you're going to be mining on the same IoT system that you were always mining on. So it's not as though your market disappeared. The market is still the same. In fact, it's probably expanding because there's more miners maybe that would be going that direction. Now, what I would say is that the IoT market will go back to being the kind of market it has always been, and that is a small fraction of the overall wireless network market that's out there. Helium needed, I think, to do it in a strategic way. Maybe the way they rolled this out should have been with their miners to say, hey, listen, we're going to coach you guys up. The IoT system is not going away. We're going to coach you guys up to the next level of networks of networks. We're going to advance your hardware and be able to get them into the 5G miners and maybe do something that would help them go in that direction. I think that is going to be the future of where Helium can potentially do it. This was an interesting tweet right here, which is back to my point. There will never be enough IoT data transport to support the network. Hence why Helium probably did this. The network would have to go twice as large as it is now for that to be a viable minimum, and without point of contact density, that won't happen. Besides, with HIP IoT, part of Helium will be at a nominal at best. So this is back to my whole point, is that it's a very small portion of what this industry could be. And when you have a company or a project like Helium that understands building wireless networks and what that needs to look like, remember, you're still trying to figure out the whole infrastructure, because this is still early days. And I think the likelihood of this being able to really accelerate and make it into becoming one of the key utilities that blockchain is going to be comparing to, I think is real, and there's a big opportunity here. The question is whether or not it's going to really affect the future of where all of this is going to go. They still are doing some partnerships. They've got the Compute Coin announces strategic partnership with Helium's manufacturing provider. This is Midas Wireless. And I think because of the fact that you're now moving into 5G, the potential for cellular, the potential for VPN, because of that, you're going to open up a whole new layer of manufacturers. You're going to open up a whole new layer of integrators. And all of that is only going to expand and compound on itself, because essentially that is the technology that is running all of our wireless network infrastructures today. So the likelihood of this really becoming something of a global phenomenon is real. All right, so I want to thank our sponsors today, and that is Emrit.io. When you're thinking about helium mining, this is the company to maybe take a look at, because it is one thing that they're approaching, and that is the ease and process to actually start and getting going on mining. So right now you can actually order a device, which that's probably one of the biggest things that you face right now on helium miners is the lead time to get one of the miners in and to you. With Emrit, you actually can get the miner very quickly. You order it, you can activate it, and then start mining. You go through a process of setups. I like the fact that, one, they're a Helium partner, and when you look at partnerships, I think this is a key thing in any kind of project, is you need that kind of solidity that kind of connects these big projects with projects like what you're seeing here with Emrit. So one-time hosting fee. This, I think, is going to really start to ramp up as we see more and more technology lean in on this, including things like 5G, a lot of IoT traffic starting to move in. So the demand for this kind of network architecture is going to be very, very serious. If you're looking at going into Emrit for Business, they can go in and start developing or work with you in developing a fleet for your businesses. So depending on how you are going about this, whether you're doing it as an individual or maybe as a business, you can look at deploying a whole layer of Emrit devices and going with this same approach. So, and you can kind of see here, there's a lot of different use cases for this, from retail franchise systems, public spaces, commercial real estate, property, utility monitoring, all sorts of things that really kind of play into the enterprise side of this. So make sure and check out Emrit.io. I want to thank them for sponsoring this episode. So I looked at the chart and I wanted to kind of compare. I was just thinking, well, where could Helium potentially go? This is their all-time chart, and I just want to kind of show you back where they were. We'll go with this kind of unrealistic. This was back in November when Bitcoin was hitting its all-time high. Helium was trading in at $52 a token. Then you've got a more realistic number here in January, trading at about $40 before we started seeing the slide of pretty much every token out there, altcoins and beyond. And then if you go down here to the 3-month, you can kind of see where Helium has come from, which was right there at the $26 mark, and where it is right now. The interesting thing is there's a little bit of movement right here. And when I look at what's happening on sentiment, we're starting to see a little bit of this bottom curvature move out, and that's happened only in the last 2 weeks. So this is something that I'm very interested in, because it either tells me that Helium could be riding out of this as one of the tokens that could get a little movement here with or without Bitcoin, depending on the kind of partnerships. And again, I think a lot of this will roll back to PR and all that good stuff. And that's typical of any kind of project like this. But utility is going to be a big one. And it is the thing that draws in VCs and a lot of the tech community, because they understand utility. So I think the opportunity there might be interesting. If you look kind of just on the chart here recently, how Helium has performed, this was back here in March. They had that nice little run up, and we identified that in that move. So that was a 32% move right there. Then you had a nice little run up right here. This was back here on May 1st. That one was a little 34% move. And then here we are right now. We're on a big green candle, and we are on an upward trend right now. So if you look back at the CPI data, right here is where we are currently. It's showing a little bit of an upward trend, and you're seeing that essentially starting to blow on Helium right now. So I think the news is starting to get out there, and I think people are starting to realize what they're trying to do. And I think this will be the big question. The other thing that you have to be cautious with Helium on right now is because this card has been played, the markets are going to get more competitive. I think there will be other players out there that may get more, maybe come head to head and try to take some of Helium's market share through their existing miner network, because they've already farmed out a network and created a network of users that essentially understands how this is going to work. So the opportunity is real for a new company upstart to potentially come in and maybe take a little bit of their thunder. Helium has to play their cards very, very good in the next few months. And I think they really need to understand how to not only educate the Helium investors, but also educate the future miners, because there's a lot of miners that are not out there necessarily looking at this as a business. It's more maybe as a passive income or even more of a hobby. So I think this is something that they're going to have to overcome quickly. All right, we're going to do these kinds of breakdowns for you guys. Remember, they're market movers. These are not financial advice. The goal behind any of this is to give you some insights, a little bit of our own analysis on it, some of our tech chops, and then a little bit of our own data to hopefully give you some direction to help you guys go out and do the research and make a decision. Is this even for you? You know, because there's a lot of altcoins out there. There's a lot of really good layer ones that I think are going to be here for long term. Helium is still an if, but it is one of those that I'm leaning into in the sense that it could be an if that could really blow up. And that is because of this new evolution of where these new networks are going. So I'm really watching it very closely. I'm not currently buying Helium, but I am watching it. I hate to FOMO in, but I feel like they're going to be on a little bit of a move here. But I am waiting for all coins to still see a little bit of a bottom before we see a nice little resurrection as we get past all this economic issue. If you're listening in over on the podcast right now, make sure and tune in over here to the YouTube channel. This is the place for all this good stuff, all of our breakdowns, our charts, our analysis. Find it right here. All you have to do is jump in, subscribe to the channel, like a few videos, and that's going to help you get notified when we do live streams, all that good stuff. If you want to reach me, it's out on Twitter, @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechBath.